So obviously this is our annual general membership meeting, and it's one thing we try to do every year and when we can do it, and it's a time to just pause and ask all members to attend and meet the board and then vote for the folks up for the election this year. And so John's going to introduce the board members who are here tonight.
All right, what we've got is our secretary, Phyllis Caskell. Betty Pollock is the trustee.
Betty, yes.
We've got Don Sutherland, our treasurer. We've got our vice president, George McRedichian. We've got Ray Maldonado, one of our trustees. We're missing our archivist is Mike.
Oh, there he is in the back. Us.
And us. Oh, I'm sorry, and Phil. Dennis.
Dennis. Well, soon come.
And let me get to that. We're having a vote today, and the 4 people that are on the ballot are Dennis Cuccinella for trustee, Ray Maldonado, George for vice president, and Don Sutherland for treasurer. And
so before we do that, can we tell them a little bit about what we've done this year?
Sure.
Very quickly. Part of the general membership meeting is just to make everyone aware of some of what we've worked on. We have met monthly, we've made a lot of improvements and changes to things, I believe, over time. One is we've started a new advisory board, and we're very excited about that. There's your folders. We also had done, despite the pandemic, many programs. We had a Jane's Walk with John and Phyllis of the murals. We had a history of slavery in Mamaroneck with John presenting. We had a walk and talk at the harbor about John Richbell with Peter. I see you there, Peter, somewhere. Peter Fellows.
my notes.
Oh, good. Take them out. We had Dr. Darla Shaw presented about Gail Sheehy, a famous Mamaroneck resident. And Mike Mimi, who is not here right now, but he's a member.
He's on virtually.
He's on virtual. Hi, Mike. Mike has done a tremendous amount of work, both in research and presentation on diversity and mapping and all kinds of topics, the president's elections.
And as well as
fixed our website.
He's very good at it, and it's going to continue. Set us up on Facebook, set us up on Instagram, and
all good.
He's all good. He's doing some good stuff.
So that's one of the exciting pieces of our advisory board, is having some experts available to help us with things. So anyway, I believe our ongoing efforts will be just to continue to work on that, and Mike Tripico has done a phenomenal job over at our Historical Society room at the library. I'm sure you haven't had a chance to see it yet, but when you do go to the library,
Calendars.
Check, that's next on the list. Okay. Joe, check it out. And we look forward to hosting some activities there. Mike and Betty also went ahead and once again this year did our annual calendars, and we thank you for that. They're for sale here tonight if anybody needs a calendar. And that's pretty much it. Should I do the next part since you're not looking at your notes?
Yeah.
Okay, we have an upcoming program coming up with Darla Shaw is going to interview Jack Brewer. It's going to be a virtual program, and it should be quite exciting. And he'll be telling stories of his family throughout Mamaroneck's history. And John, now I think you already introduced the nominees.
I did.
They're all running unopposed. So thank you all members who voted virtually. Do we have a motion to accept?
I'll make a motion to approve
the candidates?
candidates.
And so you want to read the candidates? Accept the slate, yes. Go ahead and read the. 1 second, we're going to read the candidates' names.
Again.
Because you didn't.
Trustee at large, 2 years, Dennis Cuccinella. Trustee at large, 2 years, Ray Maldonado. Vice President, 2 years, George McRedichian. Treasurer, 2 years, Don Sutherland.
So we had a motion, Phyllis, I believe, to accept the slate as is.
And Mike seconded.
Mike second and Carol second. All in favor?
All opposed? Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all
Thank
very
you.
much. So we appreciate it. So, was that quick enough? We now have a really exciting program tonight, I believe. Joe Liberti, a teacher from Mamaroneck High School, who I think I met you in your first year teaching.
Probably so, that's correct.
Probably so. Well, he's still as young. And he blew me away in his first year of teaching with just the way he got students actively involved and really interested in things. He really knows how to harness that energy. And so Joe's here tonight to tell you about one of his programs that he's running over at Mamaroneck High School. But I guess they're really running it because they don't stop, right?
Right, exactly.
So he'll tell you a little bit about it, and then you get to meet the students. So enjoy. Joe Liberti.
Okay. So I should probably go and angle this just a bit for folks at home because I need to be over there. I'm hoping that works. I think that works. Excellent. All right, so let me just first say thank you for giving me the time to present to you. It seems rather apropos that I'm here in this particular building. I understand this is actually one of the earliest sort of civic organizations. That's right.
Alice, when did you guys start?
1925.
25?
Right.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so I did a little history, and I understand it's sort of one of the first sort of civic organization in Mamaroneck.
But I think you existed before that under a different name.
Possibly.
Yes.
So even earlier.
Pretty sure about that.
Excellent. All right, so it seems rather perfect that I'm here tonight to tell you about a program that's very much grounded in civics. So this is the first time I was just thinking as I was sitting there, it's the first time I've spoken publicly without a mask. It feels like almost risque. I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm like out in the wild here. So for 2 years, it seems like I've been wearing a mask every time I'm standing up in front of people. So it's nice to not be without a mask, to be without a mask. So about 5 years ago, I pitched, actually really about 6 years ago, I pitched a 4-year program to the superintendent and the board. A 4-year program that would have students study their community, research their community, and from that sort of study and research, come to understand some of the challenges, some of the issues facing the local community, and then help those students develop really sort of action plans to implement during their sort of final years of their high school career. So to my delight, the superintendent and the board greenlighted it. So I always have to say thank you to the superintendent and the Board of Ed for greenlighting this, because it's a full 4-year program, so it's a pretty significant commitment in terms of resources and time and money. So let me just tell you a little bit quickly about myself. Some of you know me because we worked together a long time ago, but I like to say that I'm a proud product of public education. So undergrad at Penn State and a master's in poli-sci at University of Delaware, and then off to University of Minnesota, where I did a master's in social science education. And on a historic note, all of them happen to be land-grant schools. So my education really is, in part, made possible by Abraham Lincoln and the Morrell Land Grant Act. So any of you who went to land-grant schools, you know that whenever you're on those main parts of the campus, like Old Main, you notice the buildings all sort of have the same things, like agriculture, engineering, science, et cetera, because that was the deal. You take the land, you have to then provide a certain type of education. So like I said, I am very much a beneficiary of what I would consider to be good public policy. So what is Original Civic Research and Action? That's the name of this 4-year program. For short, we just call it OCRA, sort of like the vegetable. So the program's healthy like the vegetable. So it's a 4-year program that really sort of helps students become what I call civic entrepreneurs. It's a term I started using a couple years ago because when I used different terms, we were like, it's kind of wonky. But when I sort of pitched as civic entrepreneurs, it seemed like people got that. I was like, all right, I'm going to stick with that phrase, civic entrepreneurs. And really the purpose is, to kind of guide them in coming to understand their community on a deeper level, not just sort of the neighborhood they grew up in. And then in turn, again, develop action plans with the assistance of community mentors. And that's what really sort of makes the program, I think, somewhat unique in that you're taking the sort of energy and excitement and the curiosity of young people who really do, I think, almost have an innate desire to sort of want to improve their communities, and you're connecting that with the expertise out in the community. And I don't mean expertise as in like, oh, this person has a degree in finance, but really the expertise and wisdom that exists within all communities. So all of you sitting in this room, whether you're trained specifically in something or not, you have wisdom and expertise that can be coupled with the students' interests. And I'll tell you a little bit later about some of these projects they've taken on, some of the issues that they're trying to tackle. But I'll say now, sort of, it's an invitation to all of you at some point to reach back to me and say, hey, I would love to be a mentor in the future. These are some of the things I'm interested in. So just kind of put that out in there, like an early plug. So the goal of the sort of big objectives of the program, self-efficacy, all right, getting students to understand that they themselves have power. It's so interesting because the students self-selecting to my program, anyone can try it out as starting in the freshman year. But what's interesting is even though they're self-selecting in, which you would think like they already believe that they could have the ability to really make change, I often find that they really don't believe that for the first couple years. Even though you're, again, if you're self-selecting and you assume like they kind of think that already, and yet so often the first 2 years they'll say something, it's so clear to me they don't think they actually can make change. And I try to really explain to them, first off, that change comes about when you work in groups. All right? And too often history is taught from the perspective of like the great man theory, right? One person comes along, makes change, and it's simply not the case. It happens when groups come together. And so getting to understand that it's really by working together as a group, not just the students themselves, but then their mentors and the larger community, that you can make change. And I think that's such an important thing for them to really not just hear it, but actually do it. And by the time they become seniors, it really is impressive to see the self-efficacy that just sort of bubbles up. That when they're in a room or they're talking to adults, that that's like you need to take it seriously because we've done our homework, to say just to say the least. And I think they said that's a really key piece of this program is helping the students develop that. Another piece, of course, is the skill set you develop along the way. So often, we have wonderful students at Mamaroneck High School that are bright students. You could go right through your entire high school career, get fabulous grades, go to a fabulous school, and never actually develop what a lot of people call soft skills. The ability to get up in front of a group like this and present, the ability to confidently communicate with adults, the ability to communicate through multiple modalities, and really sort of develop the other skills, organizational skills, and the communication skills that really, I think, make for successful citizens, and I'm assuming also then successful workers. And then finally, leadership skills and what I call civic capacity. Again, this offers an opportunity for students to really engage in group activities where they have to eventually be more present, right? So you can't hide in a group of 4 when you're trying to tackle a large issue, because the reality is that each student has a different strength that can at any point becomes extremely valuable to the group. And those of you who worked in groups, which all of you have, know that there's always that surprise where that person who's kind of quiet all of a sudden is able to bring something to the group that ultimately leads to a success. And then finally, the idea of civic capacities. These are the things that we want citizens to have. The ability to, again, enter the public arena with confidence, to understand how to engage government officials, elected officials, and understand that it's through those capacities and being able to work with other people that you can make positive change in your communities. So often people ask me like, so is this like a traditional civics course? Because I had civics in 8th grade or I took civics in high school. And the answer is yes and no. There's a component that's sort of traditional in terms of the civics, which is they need to understand how local government works. And they do learn how local government works. They understand that we live in this confusing town with 3 different municipalities, 3 different police departments. And it really, even the adults are like, I'm not really sure where I live. They're like, I live in Larchmont. I'm like, no, you don't.
No, you don't.
And so it's always interesting for students to come home and be like, oh, by the way, we don't live in Larchmont. It's just our P.O. box is Larchmont. So there's that traditional civics, which also includes a little bit of local history at the beginning. just to kind of give them a little flavor of sort of the founding and some of the early history.
Thank you.
And again, I lean on some of the things that you produce, so thank you. Then it's also, again, a little splash of sort of that youth leadership development that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, it's the experiential part. So it's the doing. And I really feel like in the doing is where you find the greatest really form of education. To me, the best programs at Mamaroneck High School are those programs that really get students doing what professionals do and doing it publicly. It does you no good to be in a classroom, in your seat, doing your own thing. And so I think of like programs like PACE, I think of programs like Original Science Research, I think of all the music programs, the art programs, where you are doing the work of professionals and then presenting publicly. That's such an important piece, to be public about what you're doing. And I actually even include the sports programs as another form of doing, right? You practice and then you do, and when you fail publicly, and that's good, right? And that's how you learn. So I think those to me really represent sort of the ideal form of public education, and OCRA really tries to kind of leverage that. All right. So for time's sake, I'm going to kind of skip over this. I'll just briefly mention sort of the way it's scheduled out, in case you're curious. So the way the program's been scheduled out is freshmen are invited to try it out at no cost. It's twice a week under normal conditions. I mean, normal is like non-pandemic. So twice a week they come before school starts. So they're in before school starts from 7 to 7:45, Tuesdays and Thursdays, for which they get no grade and no credit. But it's basically a prerequisite. So when you complete that freshman year, you then spend your summer doing what I call community stakeholder interviews. So you're out interviewing people in the community. And by stakeholders, that could be anyone. It could be one of you, someone who's engaged in the local historic society. It could be a local business owner. It could be elected officials. Anyone who sort of has that kind of stake in the community. Rabbis, priests, you name it. And that's sort of, again, that's sort of trying to get them to sort of a deeper level of the community, but on also a wider spectrum of that. So then your 10th grade year, you actually get built into my schedule. And the way I run it in 10th grade is I actually run the class during lunchtime to avoid other conflicts. So I teach the class during lunch, and then I take my lunch somewhere else in the day in case you're thinking I go hungry. But it avoids some conflicts, and then their 11th and 12th grade years, they're built into my second period, and I have them rotate through that period. So instead of seeing me every day, they see me kind of every other day. And what that does is it gives them time in the day to be working with their mentors anywhere. And so it shows up sort of free on their schedule. So for liability purposes, they can be anywhere and I'm not liable. But they're working on their OCRA projects. So if their mentors need to meet like here, they can meet here. If they need to meet town hall, wherever, it gives them that flexibility. So I did, just again, I do the freshman year, those have that little bit of local history. I do get them out and about. Did I make you guys freeze one winter in the Harbor Park?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so taking the different points of the town, different markers, going to Rich Bell's grave, that kind of stuff. So they get out and see things, which is good. And I try to bring hot chocolate because it gets often cold that time of year. So I just want to walk you through sort of one example, because right now I'm speaking, I feel like in the abstract and kind of broad, so I'm going to give you an example of one of the projects, and I'll tell you about some others, and then I'll let them present theirs. And really, to be honest with you, they're the main event, not me. I have a group of seniors who graduated last year, so they're all off in college. Through their research their freshman year and then the research in the summer, they got interested with this issue, which is really sort of like, I guess, disparities that they were seeing across the wider community, which they really didn't know about because of the particular neighborhoods they came from. So when they came back into their sophomore year, they said, we really want to kind of look at this issue of sort of disparities across the larger community. I said, okay, fine. So they initially were looking at sort of income disparities within the student population, and they were looking at sort of income disparities and test scores. And they said, maybe there's something here for us to work on. I said, you have to look at a lot more data. So gather up some more data, go meet with the superintendent, assistant superintendent, and start to kind of get your hands around this issue. And from that, they also had some discussions with people outside the community, outside in the larger community, and they said, you know what, the disparities you're seeing in the school really kind of reflect larger disparities beyond the school. So why don't you kind of investigate that first? And so they began to do some investigation outside, and they came across this sort of what I guess researchers call the opportunity gap. And that's the gap between high income and low income students to extracurricular activities outside of school. We're talking about like dance and music and art. And the research was indicating that students who have access to those types of extracurricular activities, those create advantages in school. So that, so students are more likely to sort of try out for the school play because they've had theater outside of school, more likely to try out for the band because they've already played an instrument for a couple of years. And then that creates those sort of disparities in school. So what they decided to do is figure out if they couldn't kind of narrow that gap. And so they created initially sort of I don't know what to call them, really it was like a spreadsheet where they went out and they sought out scholarship opportunities from small businesses. Said, hey, you're offering your class for 10 kids. Would it be a big deal if you just had 2 more spots with scholarships? And they're like, sure, it doesn't matter to us. If we got 10 kids or 12, that's fine with me. So they started gathering up all these scholarships and they put them into a spreadsheet, and at the same time they're having discussions with the social workers down at the elementary school level and said, hey, could you match low-income students who are interested in these things? And it became known as a learning link, so linking the opportunities on the outside to the students inside who had interest. During their junior year, which is when the pandemic hit, they decided to create a digital platform so they could do this more seamlessly. So they created a digital platform where small business owners could just simply go on, log in to this, in essence, app, create a profile, and enter these opportunities. And they did good descriptions, how many people are how many spots they have, and then the social worker is then alerted, and she logs in on the other side, and she can literally plug students in and create this sort of seamless connection. And so during their junior and senior years, they were able to help about 80 students, low-income elementary school students, tap into these extracurricular opportunities out in the community. Over the summer, even though they graduated, they were given an opportunity to access greater funding from the school district, and were able to really sort of fill in some important gaps over the summer for students who have sort of very unusual schedules. So maybe during the day they're taking care of a younger sibling and can't do day camp, but in the evening they have some time, so they're able to plug in these opportunities in the evenings to kind of help fill that student's interest, at the same time understanding that they wouldn't necessarily be able to pay for those. And that platform continues on. So that platform is still alive. There are still opportunities that get plugged in, and then the social workers are still then feeding interested students in on the other side. So that's a good example of sort of taking an issue, thinking about it, understanding it, thinking about the root causes, and then thinking about how do you problem solve around that. And again, that didn't happen just with them. We had a community member who was mentoring them. We had a technology person who came in on the technology side to sort of help mentor that as well. And that's just one of dozens of projects. Now I could go on and on about the list of those, but for time purposes I won't. This is just a quick couple pictures of the actual digital platform, the app they built. Again, it has two entry points, one for the social workers and then one for the small business owners. Any small business owner can log on, create profiles, and then input opportunities. Some of the students, students doing martial arts, art, music, computer science. Mac Inspires has been consistently creating scholarship opportunities. So we'll shout out to Mac Inspires if I'm allowed to do that. So just a quick, again, those are projects that are going on for my class of 2023, so those are juniors. Just kind of I've got a whole variety of things. And then one group has been running a free food scrap pickup service to kind of expand participation. Another group has been working on tenant eviction prevention. They've been working diligently to try to guarantee right to counsel for people facing eviction. They successfully have gotten all 3 municipalities to pass resolutions calling on Westchester County to provide that, and they recently also successfully helped a lobby to get Portchester to pass it. The goal, of course, is to get Westchester to pass it. So that's, again, another example of the projects. Again, they're always working with mentors in the community, so understand that you, the community, with your wisdom and expertise, are a really important piece of this program. And then the one in the middle is the one that the students are going to present tonight, and that is elections and voting reform. So without further ado, the main event, I'll let my students introduce themselves. I'll pull up your presentation. Any quick questions for me while they're kind of getting set? So any questions for me? I know there's a lot I just threw at you. I can always give out my email, all right? So at the end, or now.
Were your students aware, I can ask them, that what they had devised with those 80 kids was possibly at the end of that run changing those kids' lives?
Well, that's what's interesting, right? So I kept on saying that to them because for a while they get so into the work that they're you're down the weeds, and they're working hard to get those scholarships and making sure that everything's into the app properly and entered properly. That they'd often sometimes forget. I'm like, these are students who might in 5 years do something in school that they would not have done because of these opportunities. So I'm often want to sort of pull them back and get them to think about that, because you can imagine many of them come in and they're like, oh, they're so excited to be part of OCRA. We're going to solve climate change. I'm like, we're going to start a little smaller than that, So to your point, you have to sometimes remind them, like, small change matters, and you might not see the fruit of your efforts initially, although you can look at the numbers and say, look what you've done. But to your point, like I said, sometimes it requires a little reminding. So, other questions?
I'll make a statement.
Yeah.
Here's an asset that we've got in our community, and what is he doing? He's developing assets. Right? And that is remarkable. And
Thank
Joe,
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to step out of the limelight and let the real show begin. So first introduce yourself.
I'm Olivia Sundin,
I'm Justin Solis.
I'm Jackson Owen.
And I'm Daniel Marsh.
and this is our presentation on aligning village and federal elections and lengthening village terms of office.
Do we use this to...
Yeah, just you can use the hours. You got it.
So some background before we start. Elections in the village of Mamaroneck and Larchmont are currently held on the first Tuesday following the first Monday of November each year. And there's currently 2 groups that are elected in the village of Mamaroneck. And in group 1, 3 trustees are elected every 2 years and on even numbered years. And in group 2, the mayor and 1 trustee are elected every 2 years on odd numbered years.
So this is just a visualization. You see in your odd year elections, you got 1 trustee slot, so 1 person who can win, usually 2 candidates, shown there, 2019 general election. Even year elections, 3 trustee slots, usually 6 candidates. You can see there's obviously more spots for a trustee to win, 2020. So this is just a visualization. So now the problem we identified during our time at OCRA. So essentially, active registered voters, people who are registered to vote and vote in other elections that aren't local, aren't really turning out in local races that are during these odd-year elections. So never more than 25% of these people voting in federal and state races are participating in local trustee elections, local mayoral elections. Now we think that's a huge problem because these are people who are committed to voting and are participating in the political system, but just aren't doing that extra effort to turn out in these odd-numbered years. So visualized, it's even clearer. Essentially, on this graph here, it shows average turnout for Village of Mamaroneck trustee elections from 2010 to 2020. So the pink bars are the odd-numbered election years, so like 2011, 2013, 2015. And then your even-numbered elections are 2010, 2012, 2014. All these elections that sport, your midterms and your presidential elections. So even graphically, you can see in these even-yeared elections where you have these federal races happening, turnout is much higher. But if we go deeper into the data, you can see that based on our calculations here,
Don't ask.
So once you dive into the numbers behind the picture, I know it's a lot less flowery than the image. You find that there's roughly a 37% increase in turnout on average from these off-cycle elections to the on-cycle election. To the on-cycle elections that are these even-yeared elections that we have our presidential and congressional races.
So we think that a way to solve this low voter turnout in off-year elections is just to eliminate off-year elections altogether, because as the data shows, not a significant number of people know about them or vote in them. So our proposal would ensure that every candidate is elected on an on-year election, meaning elections that are held concurrently with midterm elections and presidential year elections. So for example, that would be like 2022, 2024, as opposed to the local races we've had in 2021. So as Justin was talking about before, there's currently 2 groups of elected officials. So under our proposal, Group A, their first election under this new system would be 2024, and the winners of those elections would have their terms be 4 years long. And this is just to ensure that that everyone is elected in an on-numbered year. And Group B, their first election under this new proposal would be November of 2022, and the winners of those elections would also have 4-year terms.
And we do have legal justification for this project. So section 3-302 subpoint 7 says that through referendum, the lengths of term for elected officials can be on even numbered years, or the elections rather, can be on even numbered years. And section 3-302 subpoint 5 says that through referendum, the terms for mayor and trustees can be extended to 4 years.
And by the way, this is in the New York State Village Law, which applies to all villages in New York State, just broadly. So yeah, this could happen in other villages if possible. This is just our legal justification.
And we also talked with the village attorney, Mr. Spolzino, and he confirmed that our project was legal.
Yeah. No red flags there.
Have you talked to any of the people that are the electors?
We talked to all of
Yeah,
them.
we
Yeah.
met with all of
And
them.
what kind of reaction did you get?
We had a pretty solid reaction.
Do you want to just?
We can, you're jumping in their presentation.
Yeah,
we-
just
we can-
well, we can
We'll
get to
get to
that.
that.
We'll
Yeah,
get to that.
I'll shut up.
It's okay. So we have 3 examples actually across the country of jurisdictions adopting a similar project here. Them being Baltimore, Maryland, Austin, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona, all of which had positive results on voter turnout in their local elections.
So our first example is in Baltimore, and in 2016, Baltimore's municipal elections were aligned with the national general election, and the 2003 election in September was postponed to November 2004 because of a clash between Maryland state election law and the Baltimore City Charter. And as you can see from the calculations on the bottom right, Baltimore's turnout for on-cycle elections was 3.02 times higher than the off-cycle elections.
So our second example is Austin, Texas. In 2014, these elections were moved to be on cycle with congressional elections, midterm elections. Just for reference, like the reason on the graph 2006 and 2012 are these purple off-cycle graphs is because they were held in May, not November, so you don't get that effect of like the federal turnout, right? So in this example as well, we got a 3.3 times increase in voter turnout relative to before this reform was enacted by Austin. So similar to Baltimore in that regard.
So the final example we have is Phoenix, Arizona. They moved their elections on cycle in 2018, and as you can see, there's a pretty significant jump in voter turnout, just increasing from like the levels in 2015 to 2018, and then even higher in 2020, which was of course a presidential election. So Phoenix, their change was actually more significant than Austin, which was about 4 times higher turnout in on-cycle election years than off-cycle election years. So aside from these empirical examples, we do have some other data that we found that supports our project. So there's a poll conducted nationwide a few years back that found that 70% of voters would favor aligning local elections with federal elections. There's also a study of a few thousand California municipal elections which show that turnout was 25 to 36% higher in elections that were held on-cycle as opposed to those held off-cycle. And in recent years, there's been a few different states that have aligned their local elections, such as California, Kansas, and Michigan. And I believe that Virginia also enacted this proposal very recently. We also have evidence that not only would our project increase voter turnout, but it would also reduce costs for both the election administrators and the voters themselves. election administrators wouldn't have to hold elections as frequently, thus saving them money, and voters wouldn't have to go to the polls as often, so they wouldn't have to be taking that time in their schedule, getting a babysitter, and doing whatever else they need to do to go and vote.
So, we have some pre-written answers to some possible questions you all might have here. So, here's a little preview. We'll go through them one by one. If you want to just start.
So one possible opposition to this proposal is how it will impact the Republicans in the town. And as you can see from the graphs included on this slide, the Republicans' margin of victory, how much they won or lost by, only suffered a negative 3% change in the on-cycle elections compared to the off-cycle elections. And this isn't really that big of a deal considering that the Republicans have half as many voters in the town of Madison.
Yeah, and we feel like the increases in voter turnout from our project would probably offset this change in a world where we have all even-yeared elections, because Republican voters would figure out that they should probably vote in local elections like everyone else. So, another concern is like that people turning out for these federal races, these presidential races, won't just move their pen down and vote for the local guy, right? So we analyzed the 2012 election and the 2016 election and found that on average 87% roughly of federal votes cast for president or representative, in this case president, are retained by local candidates. So that means 87% of the people voting in these elections still move their pen down to vote for the local guy, which doesn't offset the gains from our project. Another concern possibly is this will get rid of split ticket voting, so people voting, say, for a Democrat in a local race and then a Republican in the national race. One concern is that people will just, see the R or the D and will just vote all the way down that way. But when we analyzed the 2016 election, we found that roughly 13% of Democrats voting in the 2016 presidential election still switched votes to vote in the local election. So that we think that's like a pretty substantial block of people who are still willing to, actually analyze the issues and vote based on their preference. And that doesn't even assume the people who vote for both candidates of the same political party and still analyze the issues. And then it's just visualized here as well. So in 2012, it's even more pronounced. So like 16% of people split their ticket and voted for different political parties locally and federally.
And the last concern is if trustees will run for 4-year terms, because we're extending the length by 2 years. But we found out, and we looked at the data, and found out that 23 village trustees have won at least one 2-year term from 2000 to 2020, and 17 of those have run for a second 2-year term. And that really shows that they're willing to engage in 4-year terms despite the 2-year term lengths currently. And we found that 73.9% of past Village of Mamaroneck trustees that ran for a 1-year term decided to go back and run for a 2nd-year term, which, if you just look purely at the data, it shows that 73% of the village trustees would be willing to switch to a 4-year term.
This is just in case, there's a concern that some candidates won't want to put down the commitment of 4 years, but our data reflects that a lot of them are willing to put in the time and serve 4 years for their community.
So overall, while the idea of a 4-year term can seem like a huge change, the neighboring town of Mamaroneck, and this is actually a trustee from the town of Mamaroneck's quote right there that you can read, has had, and by all towns in New York State law, have 4-year terms for their board members. And in this case, we believe that the benefits outweigh possible criticisms. A board that has worked there, that has been on the board for 4 years, is much more efficient and can get a lot more done than they could in just simply 2 years. And Abby Katz really, we met with her and she really accentuated this point and said how she's been able to do so much more with the more time that she's had in office and not having to worry about an election every 2 years.
If we read some of the quote, it's like, with a 4-year term, you can advocate for projects, and there are no, and are there to steer them through to completion. So, her words.
So in conclusion, our project increases government accountability because it results in more people voting, and in turn that will result in more direct representation, and voters will be able to officials will be more able to represent their constituents according to their wishes. And it also removes inconvenient election years, which results in more people coming out to vote, it being more accessible to everyone who lives in the village, and there's more discourse about candidates' values, and they have to submit better proposals if they want to win an election in a more competitive year. And we believe this is the first step to good government and to broad representation in the village.
By decreasing the number of elections held, our project saves money not only for the election administrators, but also for the voters themselves. While the funds saved by our project are by no means insignificant, it's also symbolic of what we hope to accomplish with our proposal. By making sure that money is spent efficiently by our government, we're able to advance the principles of good government in our town.
And as our testimony from the town of Mamaroneck officials show, local officials with 4-year terms have much more efficient government and are able to get a lot more done.
And finally, it just makes voting easier. Like, you don't have to go to the polls as many times. You just have to move your pen down to participate in local politics. So we think it's a pretty simple solution to a complex problem, a first step in opening up local political discourse, preventing some of these unopposed races, and getting more marginalized communities participating in local democracy. Thank you.
A question? And we have a few minutes for questions.
Sorry, we're not going to take questions tonight, but we do have our emails to distribute. If
Oh,
you want
okay.
to send an email to
Yeah.
us, we'd be
Okay.
happy to respond.
Oh,
But one thing just to quickly mention,
Yes.
the hope would be to get this on to the ballot through a referendum
Yes.
for the fall of 2022, correct?
Yes.
Quickly.
So just so you know, so the goal will be just simply
Right.
to put it to the voters and let them decide in the fall.
So then my question is pertinent to that, only, is this about just the village of Mamaroneck?
Starting
I
with
just
Village of Mamaroneck.
wanted to make sure I understood
Yeah,
that.
so
Okay.
it's just targeting the village of Mamaroneck.
And then, just to quickly answer your question, I know we actually didn't get to it in the presentation.
It's all right.
So last year we met with every member of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Mamaroneck. We were very close to actually getting our initiative on the ballot in 2021. However, some budget disagreements got up, and we got kind of pushed to the back burner. So we're trying to regain our momentum here and really try and push through to 2022 to actually get this thing done, because we were so close, but just
Yeah.
the winds of change weren't in our favor. So
Yeah.
we'll just keep working for this.
We did have a lot of support throughout the board. There were some obviously concerns, but we've addressed most of them in this presentation, and it is like a kind of drastic thing to some people, and it definitely can look drastic, I think, in some of the policymakers' eyes, so I think that could have been a little bit of the problem why it didn't get passed, but there was definitely interest.
But the idea, essentially, I think there was a perception that obviously, like, if a board of elected officials were to extend their own terms, it doesn't look so great. But we think because the legal mechanism allows for a permissive referendum, so putting it to a popular vote, a yes/no referendum on this issue, we believe that would obviously provide the people a lot more input in term lengths and when they want their elections to be done.
There is a trustee watching this, by the way. Seriously.
Yeah.
And going back to what Jackson said about, increasing awareness about our project, if any of you had any local organizations that you think would benefit from us giving this presentation, Jackson can start handing out our email addresses,
Yeah.
and we'd love to hear it,
Yeah.
as well as any questions or comments you may have on the presentation.
Yeah, I believe we just actually found out today, I don't even think I've told you that, Mr. Library, but we're presenting to a local summit on January 11th.
Wow.
So that was something that we've been working on for quite some time, so we finally got the in with that, which is exciting.
Great.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
Before you guys move, we just want to thank you very much, and we have the Historical Society certificate for you to put into your collection. Daniel,
That's me.
that's you.
Well,
Thank you.
so much.
And Olivia.
It's an honor.
There you go. Jackson.
Thank you.
And Justin. Thank you very much. And
What a reward.
And we also want to thank Alice for all of her extra time to get this done with us. And please, while they come down, there's water and back. And Mike has this big display back there of archives, and you have any calendars left, Mike?
There's a few left.
Just a few, all right.
Documents.
And I'll do a plug for you guys for the Mamaroneck Historical website. We have research on there done by Mike Meany of how we have voted here in every presidential election since 1848.
Yes, I actually saw it in my
yeah.
research.
Yeah, we use all of your.
I actually saw that in my research. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We've also got a diversity, did you see the diversity setup that Mike did?
No, I'm not familiar. What does it look like?
Go on the website, all right? And he has basically looked at the census and from different countries, where is everybody coming from?
Okay.
And it shows how we've changed in the village of Larchmont, village of Mamaroneck, and the town of Mamaroneck. It's really interesting. You should take a look at that because that goes into.
Their freshman year, you probably forgot, but they did some census
Yeah.
data
Oh,
collection,
yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
They're like enough of the census. We did look at demographic change over time. We go that far back, we went from 1970 to present. I'd be curious to see.
Yeah, take a look at what Mike did.
We were
It's terrific.
Great. Excellent. Thank you again.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Yes, you were.